Welcome back to Cheddar's Opening Bell. The U.S. braces for another potential jump in gas prices following a massive cyber attack on the nation's largest fuel pipeline. The Colonial Pipeline supplies tens of millions of people. It has now been shut down for 5 days, and a criminal group from Russia is believed to be responsible. The U.S. has seen these ransomware attacks before, but this is on an entirely new level. And joining us now is Brandon Daniels, President of Global Markets for Exiger, a risk management consulting firm. Thank you so much for joining us. So what happened here? How did these hackers pull this off?
Well, so most of these hacks start in a similar path. They start in the business operations, usually inside of some of these large utilities or large energy production facilities. The industrial control systems, which are the heart, the brain of the fuel supply lines, are well protected. And so the way that these hackers gain access to these systems is starting to look at the peripheral networks. So they try to get into the business operations systems, the IT management systems, the accounting systems, looking for passwords, looking for things that they can collect that then give them access to the higher prize activity, which is the ability to lock up and disrupt systems and then create something worth ransoming. And that's how this happened. And I think the second piece is you'll also see that the industrial control systems were actually maintained, right? They maintained the sanctity of those systems. They were able to thwart this in play, but not everyone is so lucky.
But Brandon, is there something particular about Colonial that made it vulnerable, or are other companies and pipelines exposed in the same way?
There are companies across our infrastructure that have similar vulnerabilities. The issue here is the cyber standards that our bulk power system is subject to, the cyber standards that our fuel supply lines are subject to, are not consistently then spread to all of the sub-tier companies, all of their suppliers, all of the people that provide them equipment and services. And so you have these kinds of vulnerabilities that exist across our infrastructure. The second thing is, when it comes to these industrial control systems, the kinds of systems that they took offline to try and protect, and clearly understood that they had to protect, the issue is that very often there's interconnectivity between those systems and the business operations, and there's two standards of cyber hygiene. So you can kind of have this insidious infection that spreads to the rest of the body and creates a bigger problem. And so you've got smaller pipeline companies, smaller energy companies along our electrical grid, smaller infrastructure companies in general that have a more difficult time securing these supply lines. And then you've got, federal government entities like CISA that help those companies to improve their security, to achieve better standards, but those standards are still not consistent. And that's what leads to the challenge. And we're sort of only as good as our weakest link, to use the old adage.
Because we're already seeing some oil and gas prices jump. This is because of the supply shortages, right? So do you think this will affect the prices during the summer as well?
That's a great question. And I would say that the oil markets, the oil and gas markets are speculative. And we saw that during COVID, right? We saw essentially the oil and gas markets drop precipitously, but then fall to a homeostasis or a plateau at a certain point where, oil just couldn't go any lower. But then as the demand started to peak or started to look better towards the summer, you saw, oil and gas prices rise. You saw fuel prices rise. You saw companies start to do a little bit better as they saw the potential to offload some of those massive, overruns that they had in terms of storage. So right now, I think we will feel an imminent change in oil and gas prices. I think we'll feel it at the pump. I think logistics companies will feel it in their air and freight. But I think it's going to be a temporary blip unless there is something in those industrial control systems which drags this out beyond this week.
Oof, okay. And the FBI is pointing to Russian group DarkSide. Did we hear anything from these hackers so far?
So they have confirmed that there are essentially leaks and attribution points in the dark web that do point to DarkSide, that confirm it was DarkSide. The issue that we're seeing is the reverberating effect of an attack that we can't quarantine can still disrupt major parts of the infrastructure. So even if these are just for-profit pirates and they're not trying to create systemic problems inside of our infrastructure, if you can't quarantine the risk of the attack, it's going to have that reverberating effect nonetheless.
Oh boy. Okay, thank you for that information. That was Brendan Daniels, President of Global Markets for Exiger. Thanks for that insight. And coming up...